Testing, make sure that everything is working, the sound and the audio. Thank you, councillors. Okay, thank you, councillors. I'd like to declare the special meeting for Blayney Shire Council for 31st of May open, and thank you all very much for your attendance. In opening this meeting, I'd like to recognise the traditional custodians of this land, the Wiradjuri people, and pay my respects to the elders, both past, present and emerging. Councillors, I'd like to remind yourselves and everybody here in the chamber that this meeting is being live streamed and you may be recorded as part of this process. And I'd like to welcome the people who have chosen to view us here tonight on YouTube. Okay, apologies, I think we're all accounted for. No apologies, very good. Disclosure of interest. Madam GM, do we have any disclosure of interest for the business here this evening?
Yes, I do, Mr Mayor. I have a declaration of conflict of interest from Councillor Reynolds. It is in item number 4 on page 18, which is DA2/2021, 21 Egbert Street, Neville. The reason for the interest is Councillor Reynolds is an executive councillor on New South Wales Farmers which ensures the right to farm policy is fully implemented. It is a non-pecuniary, less than significant interest. And Councillor Reynolds believes it will not impact his decision on the development application.
Thank you, Madam GM. Okay, councillors, we don't have any public forum tonight and we don't have a mayoral minute, so I'll now draw your attention through the confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 17th of the 5th, 21. Can I have a move that is a true record? Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Any matters arising from those minutes? Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just one matter arising from the resolution from the last meeting dealing with remote attendance at council meetings, which is resolution 007 on page 7 of the business paper. The last meeting of council, when councillors considered this matter last time round, we were under the misunderstanding that there wasn't any flexibility in terms of the wording of the guidelines attached to the Code of Meeting Practice, and we adopted the guidelines in the form that they'd effectively been recommended by the Office of Local Government. What has become apparent since then is that it's not quite right, that we do in fact have some flexibility. The issue which caused quite a bit of concern at the last meeting, which I spoke and most other councillors spoke, was the need to give 6 business days notice by a councillor if they wanted to attend the meeting remotely. That's pretty unworkable, as we said last time round. Now that we know that it's possible for us to tailor-make the guidelines to suit the way we'd like to run council business, I'd like to foreshadow that we should consider at the next ordinary council meeting, the June meeting, amending those guidelines to change the 6 business days requirement and anything else that might be appropriate to change in those guidelines. So I'd just like to mention that as a matter arising from the minutes, which will come up again at the next council meeting.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somerville. I'm sure most councils would look forward to the opportunity to revisit those guidelines. Okay, councillors, no other matters arising. I'll refer your attention now to page 11, item 2, Tourism Event Development Program. Recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan. I second that. Any questions or comments? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Fully support another business receiving our support. This time it's the Millthorpe Garden Nursery under this program, requesting $1,000 towards a nearly $6,000 project in revamping their website, etc. Another one of the many businesses that we do have within Blayney Shire, and fully support the financial assistance that's being proposed for this business in Millthorpe or just out of Millthorpe.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions, comments? Councillors, if not, very worthy funding. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, now move through to page 13, item 3, funding for the Stronger Country Communities 4, Resource for Regions and LRCI funding. Recommendation there. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Somerville would like to move that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Newstead. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to all these programs that we need to submit for consideration to the government very, very soon? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and a fantastic lot of projects that we're proposing to put up here. Particularly the active movement strategy, a number of footpaths that we're proposing to apply for this funding through with regard to Resources for Regions Round 8. And with council here, we've tried to spread these footpaths through Lyndhurst, Newbridge, Millthorpe, Carcoar and Blayney itself. So most of the community potentially will benefit with regard to footpaths, upgrades of footpaths, new footpaths to facilities across our local government area. So hopefully the government supports all of these applications with regard to the active movement strategy. There's also, with Stronger Country Communities Round 4, a number of great projects, including looking at lighting and particularly, for example, the Blayney netball courts. We've just resealed them under a previous round of Stronger Country Communities, round 3 I think it was, and to provide the funding now to actually put this new lighting in, or potentially put this new funding in if it's approved, as well as the Ballabula River Walkway, stage 4, and in Lyndhurst again, King George Oval, potential to upgrade the we're also looking at road construction, and particularly a road that does need a lot of TLC that is deteriorating quite rapidly in Hobbies Yards Road. If you drive along it, you will see how bad it is getting and how quickly it's getting. So again, any funding that we can gain from this application for that road, but also in Forest Reefs. And Forest Reefs very rarely gets a mention here in this council chamber, but to redesign and construct a new intersection at Forest Reefs, well past its use by date, that intersection. So in applying for funding, hopefully we secure that funding and we upgrade or fix up that intersection so that it's pretty well not a dog's breakfast, which it has become, and a fair bit of concern there. So a lot of great projects. There are several other projects, including King George Oval, a major potential project there for King George Oval, and also some refurbishment, particularly of Heritage Park. The potential toilet block there in Heritage Park could do with an upgrade. It's been a fair few years since constructed, so hopefully with so many projects here, hopefully we get them all supported under these 3 forms of funding, including the Commonwealth funding for Millthorpe with regard to Unwin and Stabbock Street drainage. So again, another very big project that the council is looking at. So huge number of projects, and fully support council supporting and endorsing these projects, and hopefully we get the tick off towards the end of the year and get the funding for a huge number of projects right across our community. And I think that's very important, that it's not just in one centre, but it's just about every community from Newbridge through to Lyndhurst, through to Millthorpe, through to Blayney, and in between are all potentially taking part in this round of funding. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
And thank you, Councillor Reynolds. That's the most amazing summary of what is a multi-million-dollar bunch of projects I've ever heard. Certainly, you've took the words right out of my mouth. Not much for me to say, but I'm certainly like to open the floor up to my fellow councillors. Councillor Somerville.
As usual, I'll follow Councillor Reynolds, and I'll be briefer than Councillor Reynolds was. No, I'd just like to congratulate the staff working so quickly. We've got only a matter of 6 weeks or something to get the bulk of these applications in. There's a lot of money. There's, as Councillor Reynolds said, some 30-odd projects which look like they qualify, which is absolutely fantastic. I'm pleased to see under the budget implications in the business paper, because this is a pet issue of mine. We mustn't forget that we're taking the council's taking the risk on cost overruns on these projects. The grant funding is a fixed amount. We've got a lot of projects here which are have been thoroughly costed, but there's always problems with these things when they're so far out, and they have to be put together pretty quickly. So it's good to see that in working out the costing for these projects, we are charging a fixed price premium for taking the risk of cost overruns, and that we're including contingencies in the budgeting process, because those are really two important things, so that there's so much money involved here that even a small overrun is a lot for council to find. Projects is making sure we get the costing as accurate as we possibly can and build in adequate contingencies so that the risk of cost overruns is reduced to a minimum. But as I said, congratulations to the staff for putting together a fantastic list, and it's all looking good.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somerville. Councillors, any other questions or comments before I put the motion? Councillor Ewan.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to support Councillor Somerville and Councillor Reynolds with their comments, because this is an opportunity again for Blayney Shire that we as a council would be hard to find the funding for these projects listed here, and I believe they're great infrastructure products and asset projects for our Shire that would take quite a number of years for us well and truly into a Shire that people want to be here and live in. So to our staff, may I thank you for the work you've already done and the huge amount of work you're going to put in over the next 2 years to make these projects come to be, should we secure the funding for them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ewan. No other questions or comments. I'll just quickly like to acknowledge, as Councillor Ewan has, the state government. As you know, this is Stronger Country Communities round 4, and if you remember how excited we were when round 1 became available, and here we are into the 4th round. We've seen a major, incredible upgrades to our community, and I do like to recognise our state member in Paul Toole for his support, not only of this funding, but for all the projects that Council has delivered for the community. Councillors, no other questions or comments. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, now move through to page 18, item 4, development application, installation of single-storey dwelling, 21 Egbert Street, Neville. Recommendation there, councillors, to have a mover for this. Thank you. Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this item?
To ask a question of the Planning Director.
Councillor Kingham.
Page 18 says the previous condition requiring a 20-metre wide buffer area on the registered title and applicable 88B instrument is no longer considered appropriate. Just like to know what the background to that is.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr Director.
Mr Mayor, Councillor Kingham, on page 20, it does provide, sorry, hold on, a bit further information, I'll just have to find it. Yes, it is, sorry, it is page 20, halfway down where it says, however, upon review. So basically, the matter was highlighted to council staff for further investigation by Councillor Somerville. When we researched that, generally it would not add in any great benefit to require that 20 metre to go onto the title in this instance. The landowner's known, you know, a restriction is really more so at a subdivision stage where you're trying to identify and highlight and create separation where you're transitioning, say, to multiple owners or something like that. It'd come at significant cost, and the Land and Environment Court basically says, look, where you are trying to achieve a planning outcome, you know, a restriction on the title should be the last way to do it. So that's why it's recommended to come off.
Thank you, Mr Director. Councillor Kingham.
Mr Mayor, can I ask, does that cover instrument 88B as well, what you're saying? Or is there two separate things?
So, Mr Mayor, we are talking about 88B. So what we are saying is that the buffer has to be there, and it's picked up through condition 4 in that buffer management plan. The part where we were suggesting and recommending that it physically be noted on the title as a restriction, it will provide no benefit, so we have taken that out and we are not recommending proceed with that.
Okay, thank you, Mr Director. Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Councillors, Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Question through to the Director, through you, Mr Mayor. With regard to the conditions of consent with regard to the buffer zone, and in particular the type of vegetation, the speed of establishment for that buffer zone between the agricultural land and the proponent. Could the Director outline how the proponent is going to be, I suppose you'd say, directed, or with the conditions of consent, to make sure that that buffer zone is established quickly and is of the right species and is maintained?
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Mr Director.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. So condition 4.4, page 40, we've rejigged that wording to be stronger in it's a buffer management plan, not just a landscape plan. There are some key points there regarding when we're trying to identify to the proponent tree species, appropriate size or maturity and spacing. They all come down. I'm not a landscaping expert. I don't have a horticultural expertise. We'll be relying strongly on our parks and parks supervisor to provide that knowledge. But we're trying to highlight the things that need to be identified in that plan clearly and accurately to our satisfaction and basically to our parks supervisor.
Councillor Reynolds.
Supplementary then, so how will Council enforce, given the 88B is not in this DA, how will Council enforce that it is done and done properly? Through to the Director, Mr Mayor.
Mr Mayor, condition number 34 on page 44 specifically states the buffer management plan required in condition 4 must be maintained in perpetuity. So that then reinforces that, you know, as long as that house is there, this has got to be maintained and looked after.
Thank you, Mr Director. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to the Director. With this knowledge and the conditions of consent, I am noting that I will support this development, but it's very important that the proponents are aware of the conditions of consent and make sure that they do comply, and hopefully we can get a good buffer zone established between the proponent's house and the neighbours, and that everyone can live together and work together in that small community of Neville. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments? Councillor Somerville.
I'll just say one thing in relation to that question that Councillor Kingham raised. My view on this was that when you impose a condition of consent on a DA, that condition runs with the land. It doesn't just apply to that particular owner. Exactly the same thing is achieved with a restriction on the title to the land. That runs with the land, and then subsequent owner is bound by the condition. Where there's no subdivision, which is not here, I felt that it was just total overreach to ask for something to be put on the title when it's not necessary, and having done a bit of research into that, the Land and Environment Court tends to agree with that. If someone opposes that condition, normally they'll succeed in having it not imposed, so there's no point imposing it. The distinction is between a situation like this, where there's no subdivision, you just say, you've got a title to land, you've got to put a restriction on your title, compared to a subdivision, which is the classic Section 88B instrument, where the restriction on title is incorporated as part of the subdivision, like
when in doubt, turn it off and turn it back on again. Okay, thank you, councillors. We're now back into open council. I'd like to read the resolutions in closed committee. Item 5, sale of land, Gertie Street, Blayney. Recommendation was that council delegate to the general manager authority to negotiate the sale of 33 and part 31 Gertie Street, Blayney. Item 6, page 5, legal matter. A recommendation was that council received and note the report. Thank you, councillors. That now concludes our meeting. I think